Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode in Season 2 of Undercooled, a materials education podcast. We are very happy to have a guest to interview today so that you are not subject to me and Steve talking at each other for an hour. Instead, we'll have someone interesting to listen to. And today's interesting person is none other than Enze Chen from Stanford University. So, Enze, very happy to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tim and Steve, for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Well, we should start with introductions. Let's just have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. So formally, I am a lecturer of material science and engineering at Stanford University. But maybe more practically, I like to think of myself as an educator first, but also a computational material scientist by training. I think, like many teaching faculty, including Tim, I'm very lucky to be teaching at my alma mater. So I did my undergrad in material science at Stanford, and so this is now the same department that I work in. And then after undergrad, I stayed for a fifth-year master's in computational mathematics. Happy to elaborate more on that, as I know you and Steve have many thoughts about the intersection of material science and math. And then I stayed in the Bay Area, did my PhD in material science and engineering at UC Berkeley, where my research was on computational tools for studying planar defects in materials education. I graduated about a year ago, and now I'm here.
Very happy to have you here.
And that's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about what made you want to become a material scientist?
Yeah. Oh, this is I think, a classic question. Everyone has their own story. For me, I think in high school, I knew I really liked physics and chemistry and just really understanding how the world worked from a physical perspective. Certainly, I think thinking about maybe more solid things than fluid things. And maybe the funny story here is I was lucky to do some high school research. My mentor, Lee May, she was great. She's now an associate professor at Texas A&M. And we were doing some research synthesizing gold nanorods, one of the most classic things you could do in material science. And she asked me naturally what I wanted to do in college. And so I said, this stuff is so cool. It can be used for so many optoelectronic and biomedical applications. I love the chemistry component and the engineering. I'm going to do chemical engineering.
Oh, no.
And of course, she was very crestfallen. She's like, oh, well, that's fine. You do what you want to. But I just want to let you know that this field is actually called material science. And so you might want to check that out when you get to Stanford. So that's sort of how I got my start.
Well, we're glad you saw the light.
So luckily you didn't end up learning how to build chemical plants.
No pharma.
Oh. That's such a great example, though, of something that we've been saying over and over, which is that high schoolers need to find out what MSE is and that MSE exists, for that matter. And there's so many people who would do really well in this field if only they knew that it was what they actually wanted.
Absolutely.
So you got into material science and you did your undergrad in material science and engineering. And then what made you want to go and get a PhD?
Oh, yeah, I think this is very related to what I'm doing now in the sense that, I would say for the first maybe 3 years of undergrad, I did not think I would get a PhD. I'm lucky to have a great role model in my dad. So he has a PhD in plant science. And I thought, okay, maybe this is not me. Instead, I really enjoy teaching. I was lucky to take a lot of education courses in undergrad. And I thought, I want to teach high schoolers. So yeah, I could maybe get a master's and a teaching certificate in California. And then in senior year, I learned that there were actually these teaching positions at the collegiate level. And I was like, oh, wow, I can work with slightly more mature students, though now I'm like questioning this decision. But, I learned that to do this work, you needed a PhD. And so that's sort of what really led me to pursue that more fully. Of course, I took an extra year for the master's to really build up some more research experience and see if that's really what I wanted to commit to. And ultimately, I think things managed to align.
It's interesting to hear that you were able to take education courses as an undergrad in engineering. That's, I think, an opportunity a lot of students don't have, which is very cool. Did you get to do any teaching as an undergrad?
Yeah, a little bit, I would say. There's also a funny story here. So I think as an undergrad, my primary teaching came from extracurriculars. So you can think of maybe like peer tutoring, or I don't know if Michigan has this, but at Stanford and a couple of other large universities, there's Splash, or like educational studies program. This is like a weekend event where we bring middle school, high school students onto campus. And so I was very involved
Okay.
in sort of teaching in classes for that. That was sort of my undergrad experience.
Yeah, one thing that we have at Michigan that other schools, I imagine, have, as a physics undergrad myself, I got to work in the physics help room. So I was essentially paid by the physics department to be a, on tap tutor for any student taking any physics course. And I was supposed to be able to help with all of them, which mostly caused me to actually learn physics rather than to learn how to teach. But it was also that first experience of saying, this is fun. I could see wanting to do a lot more of this.
Yeah, I think with students, especially just getting that, hearing it from another student, how they learn the material, maybe what they struggle through, it makes a big difference. Sort of, yeah, peer support, peer learning.
So how did you make that big jump from wanting to, first teach high school, then you realized you could do it at the college level, then you realized you needed a PhD, but you ended up going across the bay and working for one of the most famous computational material scientists in the world, doing pretty high-class research. How did that happen?
Oh, I think it's so hard for me sometimes to really, I guess, describe it other than a lot of luck. But, I've also heard you have to be intentional in order for the luck to fall your way. So maybe what I'll say to, especially if there are some of the younger student listeners on this podcast, is that when I was choosing a PhD program, everyone has their set of criteria. And I think for me, as someone who really cared about teaching and working with students and sort of these more service type actions and roles, if you will, I wanted to find an advisor who would appreciate this, who would understand, and who would be a good mentor in this regard. And so, to your point, Steve, I think when I was visiting schools and talking to students and faculty, Mark Osta's name, that was my advisor at Berkeley, came up time and time again as oh, he's such a nice guy, super supportive, great leader. And for me, it happened to be the right fit. That's sort of how I ended up in that group.
No, that's right. And of course, Mark is well known for working with Katsuya Thornton at Michigan.
Yes.
To do the whole computational education summer schools that they take all over the country. And I'll never forget when I took that class and Mark was here and I was using the quantum espresso tool in the Nano Hub to calculate the interatomic distance of nickel. And I said, I'm something's wrong. And Mark comes over and says, what do you mean? I said, I'm getting the wrong answer, and I'm getting different answers every time. And he just laughed and said, yeah, that's right. The computation isn't perfect, and you have to do it many, many times, and there's inherent error, and you're really looking for it converging on something. So it really is kind of like experimenting. And that surprised me because I thought it would be much more accurate, but it's not. And it was great. Have you helped him ever teach those courses?
Yeah, in a funny way. So of course, my PhD, they say there are things that you'll never expect in the PhD, that it's going to be challenging. And I started my PhD in the fall of 2019. And so then come 2020, I was like, whoa, this COVID thing, this is a challenge I could not have predicted. And so the direct answer is classes shifted around, Mark's teaching load shifted around, but we thought, what could we do still to support students during this time once things got a little more settled? And so over the summer, this was summer 21, and we did it again in 22. We designed sort of a materials informatics 3-week research internship in a way. So the students were learning hands-on experience with sort of informatics, data science, exploring the materials project. This is a computational database led by Berkeley Lab. And it was just a really fascinating experience getting to work with the students, work with Mark, learn how he, approaches teaching, approaches some of these problems. And that was, I would say, a very formative experience, if I may share. On a final secret, I tell people there are very few things in my office, but one of them is a printout of an email. And this email is the initial exchange Mark and I had about this internship. It was very meaningful. So it is now on my wall. It's in my office.
That's great. So what did you do for your PhD thesis?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. So so a bit of background for those who don't know, Steve mentioned Mark is a computational material scientist. We're an entirely computational group, and his particular interest is in interfaces, whether this is a solid-solid interface or a solid-liquid interface. And my thesis was primarily focused on the solid-solid, so planar defects like anti-phase boundaries and grain boundaries. But I think very relevant to this podcast is the third chapter of my thesis was actually on material science education. I talked a little bit about this internship, the pedagogy involved, the tools, and in general, just how computational tools can continue to drive materials discovery, illuminate understanding, and something near and dear to my heart, help students learn. Those were the 3 chapters of my thesis.
So the thesis is finished, the degree is earned, and then you're probably saying, I should get a job or something like that. How did the job search go for you? Did you go straight into applying for teaching roles? Were you considering postdocs at that point? And yeah, sort of what's the advice for someone who's about to wrap up their PhD? How should they get going with the job search?
Ooh, yeah, I know it's a tough question, I think, because there's now just, I think, more and more paths one could go down. I'll only speak to my own experience, which is sort of the teaching academic job market. I would say maybe 2 things. One is that, there's these specific sites out there, whether it's from ASEE, the Chronicle, or this like little known engineering education like PubWorks site or something, that basically there's these specialized postings from members of our community where one could look. And then the second thing, I think one of the reasons I was so excited to be on this podcast is the materials education community is awesome. So if someone is thinking about this, come join us, come talk to people like Steve and Tim. You two have been great mentors, I think, well before I started searching for jobs. Yeah, I've just been very grateful to you two, to people like Susan, who you've had on this podcast, and Allison. And I think that made it a lot easier to know, like, oh, what do people think about people who want to do this role? What are some of the challenges and the opportunities? And that's how I, informed how I wrote my statements. The specific thing I'll end on is, of course, our predecessor here at Stanford. Many of you know, Raj Kumar. He was leaving for his alma mater, Northwestern, and so he and I were chatting about this specific Stanford position. And I'm just fortunate, to have so much support in making things align.
So when you gave recent talks at the North American Materials education symposium, you and Mark had developed almost like a textbook, in a way, a series of simulations that students could use to learn about things. Could you talk a little about that, and where is that whole project going?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, at names, yeah, I think I was 50% of it was talking about this materials informatics internship and some of the maybe interactive module that we designed. That is one of the joys of working in computation, is that it's relatively easy to open source things. So we just publish that online. Anyone can still use all that code that we wrote, all the data sets, and it's pretty scaffolded. So we thought that was really effective. And then the second part is a little more nebulous, shall we say. So we thought, okay, can we take something that was like a summer workshop and translate it into the classroom where it could have wider reach, because these classes, there's more students, and of course there's material science classes across the world. And so we tried to integrate it more into like, for example, you can think of like data processing and visualization in a material science lab course. That's how maybe we could fold it in. That also had some traction working with Andy Miner, sort of initial successes. We have not built upon that because maybe for the obvious reason is I had to quickly graduate, write the said thesis. And then since leaving Berkeley, Mark and I have not, I would say, directly pursued it, but I do hope to pick up some of that stuff again, because I think for all of its shortcomings, one of the big benefits of sort of all this computational curriculum is I think it could have the potential to really expand accessibility for students, not just our own students, but everywhere.
I'd like to come back to the story at some point, but I want to follow this thread that you've opened up, which has been on our mind a lot in the last semester, including on the podcast, as I've been teaching this new math course, and the importance of visualization in what we do. Material science is inherently a very visual field, and when a lot of the core content is taught, we use a lot of nice visual representations when we're teaching dislocations and slip systems, and when we're teaching electronic properties, we have all these Venn diagrams and so on. But then when we do the math, a lot of it is still very symbolically taught. And if we teach numerical methods, then it's essentially just a coding interface and good luck. So what are your thoughts on what we can do with visualization and helping to teach students more about numerical methods and materials and more about computational materials? What's like the unexplored space here that we should be getting into?
Yeah. Wow. This is, I feel like I'm being stalked. This is such a timely question, Tim. No, I'm just kidding. Because it just so happens that this quarter, I am teaching a class on exactly this. My class is essentially scientific visualization. And the idea is, I would say, 75-25. 75% of it is this goal of let's explore different visualizations, whether it's like atomic visualizations or visualizations of symbolic things, not even programmatically. There's this big section of the course we're starting now on sketching. Basically, can you draw, design an overview figure to illustrate your ideas? But then I would say the last quarter, a reach goal, if you will, is like flipping it on its head. It's like through visualization, can you actually understand the science better? It's not just a reproduction of what you already know, but it's the uncovering of knowledge. And so this is, it's still in the works. Kind of rudimentary implementation at the moment, but this is based on inspiration from, if viewers have seen like 3 Blue 1 Brown videos.
Oh, absolutely. I wasn't going to name it first, but I'm glad you did.
Yeah. So this is like a huge, hugely inspired by Grant and all of his work. We actually have a student and another faculty member here at Stanford. The faculty member name is Colin Ophis, super excited that he just started in September. He is designing some of these sort of interactive modules and visual modules. We're working together on some of this stuff. He has a student who's actually literally using Manim, the engine behind 3 Blue 1 Brown, to make material science visualizations.
Oh, wow. I'd love to see where that goes. That sounds like exactly the thing we need as a field.
Yeah, because I think you're right. I think it's just it would just be another view, another representation of that material that could reach more students, right? Those who like numbers still have that, but those who may need a different approach, I think this gives another avenue to access.
Yeah, and something that we know from other fields, I mean, something that we know from education literature in other fields, in physics and especially in chemistry, is students achieve fluency with topics when they're able to map between different representations. When a student could say, here's the equation, here's the picture of the physical system, here's a physical model of the physical system, here's my verbal description of the process. If they can navigate between all of those, they actually know what they're doing. And there is still just gaps, I feel, in the MSc curriculum where we haven't got that suite of representations figured out for students to develop their fluency in. So, oh man, perfect answer. I love it. 10 out of 10. There's also the challenge, though. Well, just one other thought, which is, as teachers, when someone else has prepared the perfect thing, it does take a little bit of humility to say, you know what, this thing out there is way better than whatever I would produce. Go learn from that, and then let me coach you through, developing your proficiency with it, rather than feeling like we have to reinvent everything ourselves from scratch. There was more than one time in doing math where I'm like, yeah, there's a 3 Blue 1 Brown video on that. Go watch that video, and then come ask me your questions, and we'll have a conversation about it. And it gives up a little bit of the control of the classroom, but I think it's ultimately better for the students.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Tim. Obviously I'm only a year into this job. You two have much more experience, I think. But I do think that is something that I'm, excited about, is like how we can better create a network. You two have worked a lot on this podcast being one example, just creating a network, a stronger network among instructors to share tools, resources, methods.
So what other courses did you teach this year, and what are you planning on teaching next year?
Yeah, so this course that I just talked about, this scientific visualization, is new. The other 2 courses I teach our undergraduate courses, whether it's a core or elective. So the core class I teach is a class that is 50% structure and 50% characterization. And this was actually very meaningful. So one of the fun things about teaching in the program I went through is it's like, oh, I took this class. This class was actually the first material science class that I took. I took it concurrently with our department's introduction to materials. And so I find it's meaningful to be back there working with the students, learning a lot from them. I think you two will probably agree that like every teaching experience, you learn a lot from it, even though you're the one teaching, quote unquote. I feel like I'm learning a ton, and so that's a lot of fun. We do I try to mix in a lot of demos because sometimes the theory is like, so we have hands-on models. We go into the research, the microscopy room where they have those research grade microscopes. And that's a lot of fun. And then in the spring, I teach energy materials course. This was a course that that hadn't been taught for a while. I joined. I really wanted to learn more about energy. We have a new sort of school of sustainability here, and so it's been really cool learning about solar cells, fuel cells, batteries, and interfacing with all sorts of people working across from the modeling to the life cycle analysis to a lot of the policy stuff. It's a great mix.
That's fantastic.
Did students in this energy materials class, did the students want to engage with more just bigger questions around sustainability? Were they more focused on like what the atoms and molecules are doing, or were they more kind of leaning into the policy stuff?
Oh, that is a question that I had going in, and I'm not sure if it's become any more clear to me. Um,
Okay,
so
so same as
one,
my answer.
yeah, I think so a couple of things about the class. One, I think very different from Michigan and Berkeley is that our classes here tend to be pretty small, just because we have so few students. So my class had about 20 students, 24. And the other, that's a plus, I would say. But perhaps the downside is that at Stanford, selection is just like a complete free for all, no guardrails. So in the sense, we had if you would call them like the hardcore, what are the atoms and molecules doing people, as well as the other people who are hardcore into the policy, real world implementation, like, are we really going to ever move away from silicon? Let's be real. I don't know, that's what they would say. And so I think that's what made the class kind of hard to balance. I don't know if I did a good job. I tried to bring in guest speakers working in industry in a variety of industries and policy. I tried to feature, yeah, problems that were ranging from the implementation of the life cycle to calculate some of these metrics, like maybe the classic current voltage curves, right, for your solar cells. But yeah, it's a fun experiment, ongoing, as most teaching experiments are.
So I'm curious about one thing. One thing that Tim and I have both been pretty affected by is the emergence of generative AI and students using it to cut corners and even cheat. And it's difficult. It makes giving written assignments gives us pause before we give a written assignment question because we really, it's wonderful that students can go find answers with ChatGPT, but sadly, I don't see any pedagogical value to it because when you just get an answer without thinking about it, you didn't really learn very much. So have you encountered anything with these generative AI tools, your students, and has any of it given you pause or ideas about how to deal with it in the future?
Yeah, this is also a very timely and tough question. I think it's funny, with all the news, especially about these new DeepSeek models coming out in the last week. So I think it definitely has. And I will be first to admit that I'm not sure if I've addressed it in the best way. In the sense that, let's say on the homeworks, if it's traditionally, problem solving, I've kept still a lot of my questions like that. But perhaps some ways I've tried to leverage AI for good. Maybe we'll put it that way. A couple of different things. So one is that I maybe create a problem where I ask them to use AI. Like the problem explicitly says, teach your little chat, have a conversation with ChatGPT and teach it to index the peaks in this powder diffraction pattern, for example. And maybe it's like, what would it be? I guess a BCC would be a very common material. And, it's like determine if it's simple cubic or BCC. And they would have to know to go out maybe to the seventh peak or something in order to see the difference. There is, I think, this was something I think I heard on a previous episode, this idea of giving either presentations or oral exams. The first I do a lot. The latter I have not tried, but I've become inspired from listening to you two talk about it. Maybe, and that to be clear, I should say that is not because I feel like it is to try to get around the AI problem. Like I would even tell students, you should use AI as much as you can to prepare for this, whatever. But then when it comes time to give the delivery, just because in industry or wherever you work after school, you'll have to be able to deliver without an AI chatbot next to you. Though I don't know, maybe I'm not predicting the future correctly. that's the second one. And then maybe the third one is just, yeah, like this class on this visualization. It is, for a material science class, I told my students, it is the least material science class you'll ever take, probably. There's a heavy coding component. It is not all coding, sketches, pencil and paper. I actually advise them to always start with that. But there is a heavy coding component. I tell them, I think as a lot of my colleagues, we've discussed this among our faculty, is that you tell them, for let's say coding in this sense, in this specific instance, it's okay to use AI. We recommend it because ultimately we hope you can glean science from the code, right? We're not trying to write the world's most beautiful foolproof code. And just thinking about maybe, what it is we want students to get out of it and where AI can and maybe where it shouldn't play a role.
Have you seen the work of there was a PhD from Stanford in applied physics who, when he did his PhD defense, his committee said, man, that was an amazing presentation. The physics wasn't so great, but the presentation was incredible. Maybe you should think about a career in science communication. And that's what he did. And his name is Jean-Luc Dumont. And so if you're interested, have you seen his work?
I have, yeah. I linked some of his materials in this class that I'm teaching now. I think he and a lot of others, do a really great job.
We've had him come to Michigan and give talks for the engineering school, and the medical school discovered him. And now we're like fighting with them, fighting over getting him to us. It's hard to share him. But I love his idea of minimalism in presentation where every drop of ink is precious. And you, just to avoid noise like the plague, so that your signal to noise ratio stays very, very high. It's great to hear a physicist talk about visual communication the way an experimental physicist would talk about it. But that's a lot of fun.
Well, I hope you can get him. I've only ever sort of seen his YouTube talks of his recorded presentations, but I feel like just science communication in general is so important.
Well, you should contact him because he's not cheap. He charges, several $1,000s to give a talk, but that's how he makes his money. But he usually goes around the United States, and I'm sure he'd love to come back to Stanford and give a talk there. That's his alma mater.
Two thoughts about just what you were saying, Enze. The first, I'll give you an exam on the oral, or an update on the oral exam situation. So I have a 48-person physics of materials course that I'm teaching this semester, and I am giving an oral exam for the midterm. It'll be 10 minutes per student, so that's, do some multiplication division, that's 8 hours, which is a good chunk of time, but I can do that in a week, and it's probably only twice what it would take me to just grade paper exams anyway. So it's not that insane of an investment, but in 10 minutes, I can absolutely tell whether a student understands a particular quantum mechanical phenomenon or not, probably within the first few sentences. But then I can work with them and develop that understanding. So it's formative assessment, not just summative assessment. So in 2 months, I might come back and say, that was the worst idea I've ever had. Don't do it. But for now, I choose to believe. But as far as the use of AI in coding, this is an area where I've really struggled to work with our students. And I'm not teaching primarily computational courses, but I am teaching lab courses and I'm teaching math courses where students have to use code to do stuff. And they're very happy to follow my instructions to use generative AI to write the code for them, but they still really struggle to conceptually organize the architecture of their code and figure out how to even tell the computer really what they want to do in a way that is meaningful to the AI so that it produces useful output. And is that a problem you've encountered? And how do you teach that as a skill? That's a place where I feel very blank as far as how to help students get better at that.
Oh, yeah. Wow. That is, yes, very insightful. I cannot say I have nearly as much insight I have not heard this problem expressed directly by my students, but it did actually come up at a recent department town hall we had with like students and faculty. They mentioned this. They were like, someone was like, "Oh, we could just use AI," and then another student immediately quips, "Yeah, but I don't even know what question I would begin to ask to an AI because I don't think like you as a computationalist do." And so this is where I would totally be open to hearing what you two have encountered, but I'm thinking even some like, I guess they call it prompt engineering, is the term they use, but like ways to guide students in like asking AI, sort of like teaching them how to fish. Like, here's how you construct
Right.
a prompt if you're confused about X. And here's how you iterate with it, sort of have that continued conversation. Yeah, I personally have not created such a guide or come across one, though I have not looked very hard. And but I would imagine something like that could potentially be useful.
That would be a great example of a open source resource for us to share within the community is how can we teach prompt engineering at, a day one level to our students so that whether they're doing good or evil, at least they're doing it well.
Yeah. I also wonder, I think Steve may have mentioned this previously, like if any of those like models trained on your class materials could also help in this regard. I don't know if either of you two have seen sort of, yeah, whether that is like a bump up from the general open source models out there.
Yeah, so the University of Michigan has licensed some of the OpenAI tools with the express requirement that prompts from U of M, people who've logged in, will not go to help train the future model. So it's more secure. This allows faculty to like put in student work without worrying about violating FERPA because it's staying right here. And the in using those tools, it offers the opportunity to make a standalone AI tool focused on just one class, where it scrapes your Canvas site for information. It scrapes the recorded lectures, any YouTube videos you have linked to it. So, we all made these YouTube videos during COVID, so we can include those. So it's sort of a curated data set. And then it's answering questions where that stuff is put forward. It still goes out on the net to fill things in, but it's delivering material that was chosen by the instructor of the course. So you might get a little bit better answers. And so I've used that for several terms. It's now open to anybody on our campus. It's called Maisie. And not a lot of people use it.
Oh.
And I'm not sure, I thought I was all excited because it let me write a system prompt, sort of a higher level way to interpret the queries of the students. So it said, don't just give the student the answer. Instead, give them a process to guide them to discover the answer on their own. And it works. It's amazing. It tells the students, here's what you need to consider to get to the answer you just asked. The problem is the students know damn well they can just go to GPT and get the answer. So they don't go through the process that we carefully have crafted for them. They just go get the answer. And they short circuit the value that we're trying to give them. And I don't know how to fix that. That's kind of a problem, and it's really kind of sad. But it's an interesting idea. I think that it's something that you can use in class. It might be even a good way to help you develop a lesson plan, because it can often find a better path for the students to learn than maybe we would think of. But we already knew that. We already knew GPT is fantastic at summarizing things. It's fantastic at giving you bullet points instead of a document. It's great to, I used it to help me craft higher level, outcomes, things that, that I was calling standards. So, you sort of have a course goal, like a statement that you're trying to, but that's too coarse. And then you have the lesson level objectives, which is exactly what we want to cover in a lesson. The stuff we used to have 12 to 20 things that we would jam into a 50-minute lecture. And when we finally started writing them down, we said, uh-oh, that's too much. And we found a way to reduce that to like 6 or 7 things that we were trying to teach. But this is at the middle level. And how do you come up with those statements? So I actually fed in all the objectives for this, module level stuff and said, could you summarize it and make 2 clear statements? And it was pretty good. I had to change it, but it was still it really helped me get started. And now that I've gone through that, it's actually pretty easy to do. And I would always come up with a conceptual standard and then a problem-solving standard. Because those are kind of 2 things that are very different, but they're both just as important to teaching our students. And so, so ChatGPT helps me. I think it should help our students. I think they need to learn how to use it ethically. I think some things are totally ethical for using it. Like if you write a personal statement or a letter for going to graduate school and you feed that into ChatGPT to then make it better, there's nothing wrong with that, in my opinion, because that's just like asking a trusted friend to edit your work. We all need an editor. But you wrote the original document. It's yours, right? ChatGPT is just making it clearer and better. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with using ChatGPT for other things as long as you give it credit, just like we do with any academic paper. So teaching students those things are very important. It's here. It's not going away. We have a responsibility to teach our students how to use it correctly and ethically. So I wish the little small models for the class worked out better, but it's the students who then subvert the whole process by doing what they're really good at. Boy, are they efficient at finding out ways to spend the least amount of time to get the highest possible grade in a course.
So setting aside the AI question for a second, Enze, I regret to inform you, you are now officially old. You are a generation separated from your students already, and it's just your first year because, you went to school without generative AI and they went with, and so there's kind of a generation gap there. But besides that, are there any cultural differences that you see, between yourself a few years ago and the students you have now? Are there times when you shake your fist and say, kids these days?
Oh, 100%. Like, it's unbelievable. Gen Zers, I think, are absolutely wild. I think I can say this because my younger brother actually is still in college. So I get like the live play-by-play from him.
Oh, man.
And this is so funny. I think this is a question many people talk about. It's interesting because about 2 months ago, I was interviewed among sort of this panel of teaching faculty by someone from the Chronicle on this topic, but they wanted to put a spin on the question a little bit, which is, what gives you hope in teaching Gen Z? And so I'll start maybe by directly addressing the kids these days. Something that you've talked about previously was sort of preparedness. I do think there's a different standard somehow with the preparedness. I don't know if it's a COVID thing. I don't know if it's like a school level thing. Like, for example, on the topic we said earlier, you've mentioned about math. Our major has changed. When I went through, we required like 5 math classes, like upper level, and now they require maybe 3. And so I'm like, okay, this probably leads to then a different not just technical level of preparedness, but maybe a different view on what it means to be a material science major, if you will. But okay, that's like the kids these days. What gives me hope? Yeah, I think something that gives me hope is that I also observe what Steve sees, which is they want like the biggest in industry, I guess we call it ROI, return on investment, the most win for the least amount of work. And I tell myself internally, I remind myself that, okay, this must mean they are energetic. They are hopefully curious about the world's problems and really like driven to find solutions to those problems. And so maybe my job as an educator is to channel that gusto, that motivation into something productive while telling them like, okay, but eat your vegetables and like, okay, but you need to develop this. But so that's all to say, maybe this has changed the way I teach in that I try to put up more like applications or maybe making something more real world or industry or academically relevant, bringing, yeah, just even in some of these, when it comes to like core theory or something that might be a little more mathematical heavy, like a lecture on symmetry, relating it to something more tangible, maybe at the end of the tunnel, what they'll see when they get there. Yeah, that I feel like you need more of to get things across to these students than maybe back when I was an undergrad here, we kind of, for better or worse, just accepted it. Like, all right, this class is a full class of diffie-q and integrals, like on reciprocal space and waves. Okay, we're just going to crank through the math, and I believe that at the end it will benefit me, which it has, but I'm not sure if the same statements would fly these days.
So that's interesting. You say, what gives you hope? And it made me think about something that I just noticed today. Maybe both of you have noticed it as well, because both of you teach teams a lot, right? And when we teach teams, and so I'm teaching this class with an archaeology professor, and so we have huge variety, huge diversity in our teams. People from English or history are sitting right next to an engineer, and then right next to them is a business student or a kinesiology student. And we have our IAs who try to make sure that there's no introverts, that everybody is contributing and everybody is talking. And it's usually worked well, but we've always had problems in the beginning of the term, and we'd have to sit and talk about specific people. But this year, we haven't had any problems. Zero. All the students are talking. And we're realizing that all the students in our class went to high school after COVID. And somehow they're more social. And I think that drives a lot of hope for me because they're all actively involved with each other. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for team-based or project-based learning. So I don't know if you've noticed any of that. I don't think Tim and I have talked about this yet, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. I have observed this. In the fall, I taught that crystal structures class for the second time, and the peer student-student interactions are very different. Some of my colleagues who teach larger intro classes, still much smaller than your classes, Steve, with larger intro classes at like the 60 to 70 level, also all say this academic year, whoa, students, I don't have to like pull teeth or push them or like dangle a carrot. They just do these in-class discussion and team-based activities much more willingly, vocally, socially than before. Yes, I think we've observed this too.
Yeah, that's been mostly my experience as well, that anything that's discussion-based, team-based in class students don't even question it. They're just like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to talk to the person next to me. I was already doing it before you told me to. Thanks for telling me to. The other side of that I've seen is getting individual students to speak up in class. Like, hey, someone volunteer for, raise your hand if you. That has been very dentistry oriented for me this semester, to get anyone except for the same three students to be willing to volunteer and answer for a question in front of the class. That's been a huge struggle. But as soon as they're working with their peers, super smooth.
So I have a solution for that, Tim. It kind of goes along with what Enze is doing with having students learn how to draw. I run an REU program in Paris, and this year I asked all the applicants to make a short video telling me about themselves as a human being. And it was great. But I had one student who started this whole thing by saying, yeah, I'm the head of my physics club, and we make popsicle stick bridges and do all sorts of fun physics things. But I'm also the head of our local improv team, which makes me a fantastic public speaker. Because once you've said a joke in front of a live audience and it falls flat, nothing is harder than that. So I can always talk great about physics. And I'm going, maybe we should teach improv to our students so they're not afraid to stand up in front of the class and, something falls flat. So what? You just keep going with it. So maybe we should teach improv.
I don't want to say I'll try anything at this point, but starting to get there. Now, I do have to look at the clock as well, because the future is coming immediately. And going back to let's end this one optimistically, going back to our hope for tomorrow and, the good things about the students that we have now, let's try to bring that into the computation thread as well. So, Enze, put on your futurist hat for a second. What's the future of computation in materials education? Where do you think that is going in, say, the next 10 years? And what do we have to look forward to in terms of new or exciting or interesting opportunities for teaching computational materials, or teaching materials with computational tools?
Yeah. So I think that last part, the reframing, I think is actually really critical. I guess two things come to mind. The first is repeating something I said earlier, which is I hope that computing will allow sort of materials education to be more accessible. It's, another way of thinking. And with the combination of more efficient compute, by which I mean like better hardware as well as software algorithms, we can create, maybe interactive animated learning modules, something that me and my colleagues are doing, many people around the world are doing. So I hope that can be better leveraged in the future. And then the second thing to sort of, it's like we're learning materials science with the aid of computation. I hope with better improvements in computing and generative AI, we can focus less on the implementation and more on the scientific insights that we can get out of computing. I think that's what would differentiate us from like a computer science department. And that's sort of where we thrive and love as material scientists. So whereas like maybe in the past you had to really spend your time debugging Fortran and BASIC, but now you just get ChatGPT to write some Python, to run your simulations or analyze your data with the intent of focusing your energy more on the data analysis and visualization. Those are two things. Maybe I'll add a third one. This is slowly in the works. I think something I'm thinking hard about. Maybe you'll see something in the next few months, maybe, is how can computing actually help instructors? Because I know we do like a lot of heavy lifting for our students. We all do. And I think there might be in a way, towards Steve's point, earlier, can we like better distribute or share resources, or using chat GPT or generative AI to help us with lesson plans. So I'm trying to think about, I guess materials education, not just for students, but also for instructors, and growing our community, making it even stronger in sort of a collaborative aspect through that. These are the things that give me hope.
That's great. So are
That's
you going
a
to come to
great answer.
the next names meeting at Georgia Tech?
It is up in the air. Cannot commit at this point, but I will be at TMS in March. I want to say I
Oh.
saw Tim, your name on the program, and maybe yours as well. Oh, you're
Yeah.
definitely there, Steve, right?
Yeah, I'm giving 2 talks there at the Judson, and we're going to have our little portable podcast set up. So Tim and I are going to be looking for people to talk to in the hallways. So if you can think of anyone else, maybe we'll find Mark Asta there. I don't know. Does he ever go there?
He does tend to, especially if it being in Las Vegas. It's much closer to us than it is to you
Right.
all. So
Yeah, so
I'll try to get him to go. Let's get Mark.
I think it would be
Looking forward
great
to
if we could go into, the gambling hall and go to the craps table and have Mark explain how he would calculate all of this stuff.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I'll be at TMS also. I don't know if I'll be pouring my life savings down the drain. We'll see how that goes.
Yeah, usually I remember one year the American Physical Society was at Reno, and they were told in no uncertain terms, don't come back. Because physicists don't bet. They know better. They didn't make any money off of them. So they weren't asked to come back. I think material scientists are a little more willing to have some fun. So anything else you want to pitch for any ideas that you're thinking of? Of course, we would love it if you would give us a bunch of links to things we've talked about today that we can put in the show notes so people can go discover them. Certainly your older work, with the databases. But what's coming up? What do you want to make sure everybody knows about?
Ooh. Yeah, well, at first, I guess that's, yes, very generous, and I'm happy to share some links to not just my things, but yeah, just things that I've observed generally in this space. I think, I want to say we've touched on most of the things between like the visualization. That's what I'll be presenting on and sharing some resources at TMS about.
Great.
And then this stuff in the works from like sort of helping instructors build collaborations, build community. I guess I'll just emphasize that that's like the most pressing thing on my mind at the moment, just sort of expanding our impact. I am a little ashamed to be sharing stuff at this moment. I think it's in too early of a stage, but maybe just letting the viewers know to be on the lookout. And I hope we can all continue this conversation, whether it's at TMS, names, or elsewhere, to figure out a path forward.
That's great.
That sounds great to me. I think that's
right,
all the time we have for today. So, with that, Enze, thanks once again for joining us, spending an hour of your time just to talk about materials education. But what could be better than that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve and Tim, for having me.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it. All right. See you later.
Yep. To everyone out there, we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks again.